And you see this most of all with spontaneous remission. This is another extreme form of intention. Spontaneous remissions are those situations where a person who has what's considered a terminal illness, and he defies the textbook description of his disease progression and the prognoses of his doctor and beats it virtually overnight. I love the name spontaneous remission. The medical profession says it's very rare, and they use this kind of terminology as though the illness suddenly goes into hiding but could spring out at any moment. But when you actually look at the studies, you find out spontaneous remission is not rare at all. The Institute of Noetic Sciences gathered together all scientifically recorded cases of these so-called miracle cures. And they found really extraordinary statistics. For instance, 1 in 8 skin cancers spontaneously heal, just go away by themselves. So do nearly 1 in 5 genitourinary cancers. 1 in 5, that's 20%. Then you've got other illnesses like diabetes, where the pancreas is packed up, Addison's disease, where the adrenals have packed up, atherosclerosis, where your arteries get furred up, all these kinds of illnesses where vital organs or body parts are supposedly damaged beyond repair have been spontaneously healed. There's even been a small body of research concerning terminal cancer patients who, with very little or even no medical intervention, end up beating the odds. I'm very interested in what goes on, and in most cases you see it's somebody who makes a mental shift. In many cases of cancer, you find case after case of people who are up against a major roadblock in their lives. You find that there's a mental component to this, and I don't agree with a lot of the thinking that says that a cancer person is a victim personality. What seems to be much more the case in the scientific literature in any case is somebody who is like a trapped rat. They've been up against unremitting stress, unresolved trauma, some sort of prolonged hostility, some terrible marked isolation, some profound dissatisfaction, or sometimes it's just simple despair. It's people who have lost their way as the central protagonist in their own life drama. I believe that people like this become ill because they lose all hope of life ever being good. It's because they are thinking the wrong thoughts. And so what happens, and what's been documented, is that spontaneous healing occurs after somebody makes a massive psychological shift and recreates a life that is engaging and purposeful. In these kinds of instances, the patient gets rid of the source of psychological heartache and begins to take full responsibility for his illness and treatment. There are some remarkable examples of this, but probably the most remarkable is a very famous case of an experimental drug called cribiacin. The patient had baseball-sized tumors, and his doctor gave him this experimental drug, cribiacin. As soon as he got it, and the patient was very enthusiastic about this drug, those baseball-sized tumors literally melted away. He got completely better. Some months later, he reads in the newspaper that cribiacin has been questioned now and may not be as effective as they once thought. All of the tumors immediately come back. So his doctor is really smart here. And he tells the patient, I've got hold of a new form of cribiacin, and this has eliminated all of the side effects and all of the problems of the first one. And he injects the patient with what he thinks is cribiacin, but what is in fact just saline solution. It's just salt water. The tumors again completely melt away. And then, within weeks, the patient reads in the newspaper, cribiacin finally discredited. Within a few weeks, the patient is dead. Now nothing changed except the patient's belief and his thoughts. The thing he believed was going to save him, that was basically just salt water, was discredited, and it was the thought that killed him. This goes on all the time with doctors. Doctors are inadvertently responsible for so many kinds of hex deaths. And sometimes this is just with a diagnosis. There was a case in the medical literature of a patient with leukemia who didn't know he had leukemia, and he wasn't getting any worse. He was going along just fine, coming to the hospital every week, getting his treatment, didn't know he had leukemia, thought he had something mild, and then one day he read his medical notes upside down and saw the diagnosis leukemia. The next week, the patient was dead, and the doctors could not find anything that had changed physically about him. Once again, the thought, the diagnosis itself killed him. He knew he had a life-threatening illness, and that alone killed him. I have a big problem with doctors diagnosing. The big fashion these days is to tell the patient the truth. Tell the patient how long he's got. By diagnosing, a doctor is sending an intention about your survival. And I believe no doctor has the right to presume to say who will live and who will die. I had a personal example of that just with my own mother-in-law. She had breast cancer and she had nursed it, and it got progressively worse so that her breast was nothing more than raw meat. When she went to her own doctor, he gasped at this when he examined her, and he told us that she had 3 months to live, and he started giving her morphine. Now, she hadn't been taking anything for the pain before, but once he gave it to her, she started vomiting in the street, and she started acting like somebody with 3 months to live. She was too late for surgery, so we took her to a wonderful alternative MD who examined her, and I was in the room, and he looked her over, and she had this awful, eroded breast, and he looked at her, and he very casually said, "We can handle that," as though he was talking about a mosquito bite. And I knew right then and there she was going to live, and it was true. It completely reversed her cancer. He gave her other treatments, intravenous vitamin C, and a few other things, but it was the hope that saved Edie. And I believe hope is the only medicine that is, and that diagnosis has no place in medicine. Description of symptoms, yes, but no hex death, no terminology that is going to present a patient with some sort of intention. But the interesting thing to take away from all of this is really the emotional context of illness and the thinking that surrounds illness and the thinking that surrounds healing. Think back when you had an illness after you had the wrong thoughts. Or maybe the time that you quickly got better when you had the right ones, when you started replacing the tape with a better version. Consider the emotional context. Wasn't it every time you had one of life's blows? Wasn't it every time you had an emotional trauma?